There's a teaching many accept without question, a teaching that tithing, giving 10% of your income, is a spiritual duty. Many believe faith grows through obligation and blessing arrives only after compliance. Yet, the truth that shook my life and thousands under my ministry is far deeper. Spiritual mastery never begins with the hand, it begins with the heart. In the quiet moments of prayer, I discovered a principle too few speak aloud. God notices joy, faith, and trust long before ritual. In my early years, ministry carried trials that money could not solve. Hunger, rejection, and despair surrounded me. Yet every breakthrough came through persistent faith, not mechanical giving. There, a seed planted in the soil of obedience and prayer bore fruit beyond calculation. This teaching runs through every sermon, every life changed, every miracle witnessed in the history of my ministry. Today, many follow tithing out of fear, guilt, or obligation, missing the secret that transforms not just finances, but life itself. The heart aligned with God releases blessings, spiritual authority, and miracles that no rule or quota can guarantee. In this video, hidden truths unfold: the difference between legalistic giving and joyful generosity, the power of prayer in releasing God's abundance, and lessons from my journey that challenge everything taught about money and faith. By the end, a door opens, not to wealth measured in currency, but to a deeper, vibrant faith that changes the soul. Insights rarely shared in sermons reveal how spiritual life thrives on obedience, trust, and love rather than duty. Welcome to Dr. Cho Prayer Secrets. Subscribe now and step into a journey where faith, prayer, and divine alignment guide every step, every decision, and every blessing beyond imagination. The first lesson that transforms the soul is simple yet often overlooked. God does not measure faith by the coins we give, but by the intention that shapes our giving. Many arrive at the altar carrying duty, obligation, or fear, thinking that the act itself unlocks blessing. I learned early in ministry that this is far from the truth. Years ago, a young believer approached me, trembling, clutching a modest offering. He said he could not give much, yet he offered it with a heart full of gratitude and trust. Later, I witnessed the ripple of his faith, a blessing far beyond the sum of his gift. It was not the currency that mattered, it was the heart behind it. Faith, gratitude, and obedience of the Spirit create a current that flows into every area of life, unseen yet undeniable. Legalistic tithing, in contrast, can quiet the soul rather than awaken it. When giving becomes a duty, it risks breeding complacency, a box checked, a ritual fulfilled, but no transformation within. Pride may even follow, subtle and silent, when a person counts their obedience in percentages rather than in devotion. The heart hardens and spiritual sight dulls. True generosity moves without thought of reward. It begins in prayer, in silent surrender, in trust that God sees the intention, the desire, the faith behind each act. This is not about calculation, rules, or outward recognition. This is about alignment, allowing every gift, every act of service to become a reflection of a heart submitted fully to God. In every sermon, every moment of quiet reflection, this principle stands clear. The inner spirit, attentive and faithful, speaks louder than any offering could. Wealth of spirit, obedience of heart, and joy in giving resonate far beyond what the hand places in the basket. Faith is the power that moves heaven. It is not measured by the coins placed in the offering, but by the trust that God's promises are alive and at work. Many believe that giving a portion of income automatically brings blessing. I have seen faithful givers remain empty while those who gave from hearts full of trust received miracles beyond imagination. The difference is always faith. I remember when my church faced great debt and scarcity, members gave faithfully, yet the burden of lack pressed heavily on us all. Then I led the church into a season of persistent, faith-filled prayer. Each morning and evening, we prayed with expectancy, trusting God's hand to guide and provide. Doors opened, opportunities appeared, and miracles unfolded, not because of money, but because faith moved and stirred heaven. Tithing alone could never have achieved these outcomes. Spiritual growth is not measured by obedience to a financial rule. It is measured by trust in God's provision. Faith exercises the soul, strengthens the spirit, and cultivates a life that responds to God rather than ritual. Prayer becomes the laboratory of faith, where desires align with God's will and hearts learn patience, persistence, and surrender. Every act of faith is a seed. These seeds activate promises written long ago, bringing them into reality. When I pray with confidence and step forward in trust, I discover that God's abundance is never about numbers in a ledger, but about obedience and expectancy. Money may accompany the heart, but it cannot replace it. True provision, lasting transformation, and spiritual authority always rise from faith, disciplined prayer, and unwavering trust. Prayer is the bridge between the human heart and the will of God. I have learned that giving without prayer is like planting seeds without water. They may lie dormant, but life will not grow. Prayer aligns the heart, shaping thoughts, desires, and actions to match God's purpose. When I pray, I do not merely speak words. I enter a space where my spirit listens, where guidance flows, and where faith meets action. Many do not realize that prayer is also the source of spiritual authority. When I pray persistently with faith and focus, I feel a power that surpasses the natural. Decisions become clearer, burdens lighter, and doors that seem closed begin to open. Prayer teaches obedience, patience, and surrender. It transforms the ordinary into extraordinary, not by my effort, but by God's work through a heart fully committed. I have seen breakthroughs in lives, families, and ministries that no amount of giving could achieve. It is never the offering that moves God. It is the intimate connection, the trust, and the alignment of hearts. True blessing comes not from transaction, but from relationship. The hand can give, but the heart must be present. In my ministry, I have encouraged believers to cultivate a rhythm of prayer, morning, evening, moments of stillness in between. Each prayer strengthens the bond with God, clarifies purpose, and opens channels for divine intervention. Through prayer, faith matures, spiritual eyes open, and the soul experiences transformation that money or obligation can never create. Blessing flows naturally when hearts are aligned, not coerced. I have witnessed churches rise, lives flourish, and miracles unfold through persistent, focused prayer. It is the heartbeat of spiritual life, the source of authority, the guide through uncertainty, and the seedbed for all true abundance. I have often observed the difference between giving from joy and giving from duty. When the heart is full, giving flows naturally like a river responding to the pull of the moon. It is not measured or calculated. It is a reflection of gratitude, love, and faith. I have seen churches and individuals thrive when every offering is an expression of the heart, not a response to obligation. Giving out of fear or duty is very different. The hand moves, but the spirit lags behind. The act may satisfy tradition, yet it does not awaken blessing, nor does it cultivate faith. I have witnessed believers give faithfully each month, yet their hearts remain restless, disconnected, and empty. The ritual alone cannot sustain the soul. Blessings tied to obligation often come with resistance, anxiety, or pride. The spirit is drained because it is not involved. The heart is absent. True generosity produces spiritual fruit. I remember a young woman in my congregation who had almost nothing, yet she gave with a joyful heart. She trusted God completely, and her small offering multiplied in ways unseen, through relationships, opportunities, and faith that expanded far beyond the material. The energy of joy, gratitude, and obedience resonates through life, bringing growth that no legal requirement can generate. Giving should always rise from love, not fear, from faith, not expectation of reward. Each act of generosity becomes a declaration of trust in God's provision, a practice of gratitude, and a cultivation of the spirit. When the heart leads, the hand follows, and the results are life-giving. The believer who learns this experiences not just the blessing of material provision, but the deeper, lasting joy that comes from walking in alignment with God. God entrusts each of us with resources, not as a debt to be paid, but as a responsibility to be managed with wisdom. I have learned that giving is not a quota to fulfill, but an opportunity to practice stewardship and active participation in God's work through careful, faithful management of what He has placed in our hands. Many believers believe that blessing comes only when a set amount is given, yet this misses the heart of God's teaching. True stewardship is not about percentages or rules. It is about aligning life with His purpose. I have guided countless people in learning to view every possession, every gift as a tool to cultivate spiritual growth, to bless others, and to honor God's plan. This is not ritual, but responsibility. I remember a family in our congregation who struggled to provide for their children. They began to manage their little resources with prayer, faith, and intention. Each decision became a prayer in action, each investment a step in obedience. Over time, their small blessings multiplied, not merely in material gain, but in spiritual depth, peace, and influence. Their stewardship produced fruit that a rigid rule could never have created. Stewardship calls for discernment, prayerful planning, and accountability. It teaches the heart to value God's resources, to invest wisely, and to use every blessing for eternal significance. When giving becomes stewardship, it transforms from obligation into spiritual discipline. The believer grows, the church grows, and lives are touched in ways that mechanical tithing cannot achieve. I have always emphasized the spirit that governs the hand matters more than the hand itself. Stewardship nurtures faith, strengthens character, and opens pathways for God's provision. It is a practice of wisdom, not a ritual to satisfy tradition. Obedience begins in the heart. I have often told my congregation that God does not measure faith by outward compliance, by rituals performed, or by offerings placed in the basket. True obedience is internal, relational, and alive. It flows from a heart aligned with His will, guided by trust and love, rather than fear or duty. I remember a young man who struggled to follow the rules of giving. He worried constantly about meeting expectations, yet his spirit felt heavy, disconnected. Then in prayer, he surrendered his heart fully to God, seeking alignment rather than compliance. The change was profound. Suddenly, his actions were no longer driven by obligation, but by devotion. God noticed the heart before the hand, and the blessings that followed were far richer and more lasting than anything ritual could produce. I have taught that God looks first at the spirit, the intent, and the alignment with His purpose. The smallest act performed with true obedience can bring more fruit than 1,000 ritualistic gestures. Prayer, reflection, and faith become the instruments through which obedience matures. A heart surrendered becomes sensitive to God's guidance, discerning the paths of blessing and the opportunities for service that cannot be forced. Heart obedience transforms the soul. It produces patience where impatience once ruled, humility where pride once lingered, and joy where fear once held sway. It shapes character and builds spiritual authority, allowing believers to walk confidently in alignment with God's plan. Every choice, every act of giving, every word spoken becomes infused with life when the heart leads. Obedience, lived from within, is never burdensome. It releases the spirit, opens doors to divine favor, and nurtures a faith that endures long after rules are forgotten. This is the obedience that truly honors God. Rigid rules often bind the spirit more than they honor God. I have seen many believers weighed down by tithing laws, counting percentages, worrying if they have done enough. This fear breeds guilt, and guilt breeds distance from God. The heart grows rigid, unable to move freely in faith, prayer, and love. Spiritual growth slows when the focus is on duty rather than devotion. I have always taught that freedom in Christ is not a license for carelessness, but a call to inspired action. Giving becomes alive when it flows from faith, joy, and gratitude. It becomes a prayer in motion, a demonstration of trust, and a channel through which God's work can move unhindered. When believers embrace this freedom, they discover that generosity can be creative, bold, and transformative, unbound by rigid quotas. I recall a season when our church faced great need. Many were tempted to measure their giving strictly by the rules, yet I encouraged the congregation to pray first, to listen to God's guidance, and to give in alignment with their hearts. What followed surpassed all expectation. Doors opened, needs were met, and miracles unfolded, not because of compliance, but because hearts moved in faith. Spiritual authority arose naturally, a fruit of obedient, inspired action rather than mechanical duty. Faith-based generosity teaches the soul to trust God's provision in every circumstance. It nurtures creativity, patience, and discernment. It aligns every act of giving with prayer, guidance, and spiritual purpose. In this way, the believer experiences a rhythm of life where the heart leads, miracles follow, and spiritual authority grows quietly, steadily, and powerfully. When giving becomes an inspired act of faith rather than a rigid rule, the spirit thrives. Blessings flow, doors open, and the soul grows strong in ways no law or ritual could ever accomplish. I have always taught that true authority in prayer and in life is born of faith, not ritual. Many believe that following rules, paying tithes, or performing religious acts automatically grants power. Yet I have witnessed the opposite. Tithing alone cannot open heaven's gates or bring lasting change. Power comes when the heart aligns with God, when prayer is disciplined, and when obedience flows from understanding rather than obligation. In my early ministry, I saw countless believers laboring under the weight of ritual without experiencing real breakthrough. Then I introduced the practice of persistent, faith-filled prayer, coupled with careful obedience to God's guidance. Those who embraced this discipline discovered a new authority rising within them. Decisions became clearer, burdens lighter, and doors opened in ways that no mechanical act could produce. Faith, nurtured by prayer and obedience, awakens spiritual authority that touches every part of life. I have shared with my congregation that alignment with divine principles is essential. Giving becomes meaningful when it is part of a life surrendered to God. Obedience to His will, devotion in prayer, and trust in His provision combine to create a spiritual current that moves in every circumstance. This authority allows believers to experience breakthroughs not only in finances, but in relationships, health, ministry, and personal growth. Every prayer spoken with faith, every choice made in obedience, every act of trust strengthens this authority. It grows quietly, like roots beneath the soil, yet its effects are visible in every area of life. I have seen lives transformed, ministries expanded, and miracles unfold when believers move from ritual compliance to faith-driven action. The hand may give, but the heart, aligned with God, wields true authority. Giving is not a duty, it is a dialogue with God. I have always taught that generosity flows from love, service, and partnership with His work. When the heart is aligned with God, every gift, no matter how small, becomes an act of worship, a statement of faith, and a participation in His purpose on earth. Giving in this way carries life, blessing, and transformation far beyond what rules or percentages could achieve. Many believe that spiritual growth can be measured in dollars or percentages. I have observed the opposite. True growth is measured in the depth of love, the persistence of faith, and the alignment of life with God's will. When giving flows naturally from faith, it reflects a heart attuned to His presence. It becomes prayer in motion, a tool for service, and a seed that multiplies in ways unseen. I recall a young family in our church who had very little to give, yet they contributed joyfully, trusting God's guidance. Their offering was not legalistic, yet it opened doors for blessings, provision, and spiritual growth that far exceeded what they imagined. Each act of giving became intertwined with prayer, reflection, and alignment with God's purpose. Their lives demonstrated that God honors the heart more than the hand. Giving, as an expression of faith, cultivates a spirit of partnership with God. It teaches patience, generosity, and discernment. Each act becomes a lesson in trust, a practice of obedience, and an opportunity to participate in the expansion of His work. The believer who embraces this principle discovers that true abundance is not counted in material gain, but in love multiplied, faith strengthened, and life aligned with the eternal purposes of God. The truth is simple, yet often overlooked. Tithing as a compulsory act cannot lead to true spiritual mastery. The hand may give, but the heart must lead. Real growth comes from faith, persistent prayer, joyful generosity, careful stewardship, and obedience that rises from the soul rather than obligation. I have learned through decades of ministry that God notices the heart first. Love, trust, and alignment with His purpose shape life far more than ritual ever could. Every act of faith, every prayer spoken with sincerity, and every gift given from joy creates a current that moves heaven and earth. Spiritual maturity is not counted in percentages or quotas. It is measured by the depth of our relationship with God, the strength of our trust, and the harmony of our lives with His will. As you walk each day, let giving become a reflection of love. Let prayer become a rhythm of trust, and let obedience grow quietly in your heart. These are the practices that bring lasting transformation, open doors for miracles, and cultivate a life filled with purpose and peace. May your heart lead your hands, and may your faith guide every step. Live in alignment, give with joy, and trust deeply. In this way, every blessing flows naturally, and every moment becomes sacred. Thank you for joining us on Dr. Cho Prayer Secrets. If this message touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel, so together we can continue to explore faith, prayer, and the deeper truths of God's abundant life.